Welcome back to the ongoing coverage and analysis of Dune Awakening. Don't mind the silly hat. If you could do me a favor before we get started, if you've been enjoying the channel, please do like and subscribe for more content. It would really help out with the algorithm and all that stupid stuff I even hate asking about. In today's video, we're going to get into some of the more interesting pieces picked up from the foreign-speaking interviewers at the Gamescom convention. Some stuff that the English-speaking crowd might have easily missed. We actually had to get a translator involved to figure out all these nice tidbits. Shout out to Frosty Flaky from the Discord. Got a lot to get into, so let's just dive right in and here we go. Why am I like this? We're going to separate things into categories here based on search terms. Let's start off with balance. In Dune Awakening, Funcom is going to have tools to balance the game if, say, 90% of the players are going to go for Harkonnen and 1% of players are going to go for Atreides. There's also going to be a night event, we all know about this. The Sardaukar will have a drop ship that will shine a beacon down onto the player at night to find them. Once they find them, the mercenaries are going to drop to the ground and fight the player. Defeated mercenaries will drop loot. Funcom does have balance for this event to prevent players from farming the mercenaries. Deep Desert could be balanced between 300 and 900 players to prevent players from being blocked off. It's a big range right now. Basically, what this is going to mean is that the zones within the Deep Desert, now keep in mind the Deep Desert is going to be 9 very large maps sort of stitched together at the seams. Each one of those 9 maps is going to basically have kind of a soft cap on it of around 100 players per area. They're going to try and find ways to kind of put barricades in place to keep players from oversaturating particular zones at one time. This is going to range from like sandstorms that surround a given area all the way to Sardaukar themselves providing barriers around certain areas to keep players from overpopulating spots. This is in the interest of preserving performance so that, you know, nobody has like a heavily lagged out experience if, say, too many players are in one place at one time. So that's kind of what that means. As far as biomes go, we know that the Haga Basin is going to have many biomes and areas to see. It's going to be very big, and it is the main gameplay loop of Dune Awakening. These biomes are going to include eco labs. Some of them are going to be mining specific labs. Some are botany labs. Some eco labs are even flooded by water and have green life. Other biomes are going to include sand, obviously, different colors of sand, so different sand biomes. There's going to be huge deep canyon areas that have limited sunlight. This is going to be known as the Haga Rift. At least one of these places is going to be known as the Haga Rift. We've seen the devs say that these areas go so deep away from the sun that you're actually going to need to bring flashlights with you in order to even kind of get around and navigate. A lot of speculation still involved in that. We don't know too much about what that means as far as the gameplay or the quest line. I personally could foresee that being a place where the Fremen might be hanging out a little bit, or some things might be uncovered about the story. So that'll be kind of interesting to see. Another key note here, after building the sand bike, which is going to be the first vehicle that you craft in the game, it is going to be possible to get to the next zone. So we heard in Gamescom that the initial starting area is kind of, again, soft locked by a large desert, and that's going to be kind of the barrier to leave that zone. If you try to do it on foot, you're definitely going to get eaten by a sandworm, so you will have to be building the sand bike to get out of there. And then you're going to be, you know, within one of these next biomes that has new resources, new enemies, locations, new testing stations. This is going to be within the first 5 to 10 hours, typically, depending on how players progress in that sense. Each of these biomes is going to have different resources, which will allow the player to craft different things. After about 15 hours, like I said, you'll build your second base, since the first base is probably going to be too far away. There will be no fast travel in the game. After building the first ornithopter, which will be about 40 hours roughly into the gameplay, it'll be possible to leave the Haga Basin and travel to other maps. This is going to include, obviously, the Deep Desert, some other maps that we possibly haven't heard about yet, so there are some secrets that they haven't revealed to us yet, so we will see what other things lie beyond the Haga Basin. It's going to be pretty interesting to see it. As far as bosses go, is there endgame PvE, large boss raids? The answer is somewhat. Quote, post-launch, not much at the game launch. There is a plan post-launch. For instance, raiding a base to turn off anti-aircraft missiles in order to secure a resource, end quote. Potential strong enemy bosses at the end of loot rooms in the eco labs. What was interesting to me is this next point here. There are humanoid bosses. It's hard to say exactly what that means. There could be a translation break there where it's just sort of an obvious implication, but it might mean something a little bit more sci-fi and crazy Dune lore than what it gives off there. So humanoid bosses is interesting to me. There will be a world boss one day. This could come in the form of something that's a large scale map event. I can't imagine what that would be. Something that needs, maybe we'd be taking down like a large ship or something like that, like a third faction comes to Arrakis and there's a concerted effort between the two major houses to try and like stop this thing, and the first one to stop this incursion might, gain some sort of political advantage in the Landsrat or access to really nice loot from a crashed ship or something like that. So that would be what I could envision that meaning. To confirm, there are bosses in the game. They are not going to be like giga monsters, as the quote says. They're not going to be, the typical kind of bullet sponge World of Warcraft massive event bosses. So it is kind of hard to say how much rooted in realism this is going to be, versus at the end of like an event or a dungeon, maybe there's just a harder enemy that you have to come in contact with. So we'll see what that means. The example of like an NPC boss would be a big guy with armor and special traits. So just like a souped up henchman, basically, instead of like fighting Shai-Hulud or something like that. It seems like that's what they're kind of going for here. On the topic of building, you will learn about harvesting, building, but those are going to be confined by the worm and the large desert, meaning that this is going to take place basically in the Haga Basin where you kind of start off. After the tutorial, there is a single player portion in Arrakis with a knife and a cutter rate to mine rocks. The first 5 hours is for learning how to play, meet the worm for the first time, sun and the nighttime system, the first buildings and the first vehicle crafting in the tutorial, basically in the southern part of the Haga Basin. In contrast to grid placement, this is interesting. There is an option to freely place building items, so it's not strictly a snapping system that's in place right now for Dune Awakening, which contrasts what I had assumed back in the Gamescom footage. So it seems like there is both. We definitely see a snapping system in place, but there's also going to be sort of a free place option, which can make things a little more organic, a little more custom. So it'll be interesting to see kind of the builds that come out. It looks like they're really trying to support like the building community and the architect side of this thing. I would imagine these freely placed items would also be included in the blueprint, that when you save a structure, all of those sort of loosely placed things would also kind of have their position saved. So that would be cool. An interesting thing, there are beta players with 260 hours on record right now, of which 250 of those hours are building, strictly just the building system. We've seen in the trailers and various clips like some really cool structures, so it's definitely believable that a lot of time could be spent just tooling around with the building system and coming up with cool bases and ideas for buildings. We've seen that you can build into the sides of the rocks and the sides of the cliff faces and things like that, so there's probably going to be just a lot of enjoyability coming out of strictly engaging with the build system, so I'm excited about that. In the deep desert, if a base is destroyed by storms, it will also remove the claim meaning the sub-fief terminal, the sub-fief console. So if a storm does happen to come through, whether it's a deep desert Coriolis storm or just a typical like Haga Basin sandstorm, if it does enough damage to the base and destroys the base, which we haven't seen the base health system in play yet, but if it does destroy the base, it will also remove the claim, obviously allowing someone else to come find that area and place a claim down to have that be their location instead. This is obviously something they're doing to kind of keep the housekeeping up for places that become overpopulated and potentially left by players that are inactive, so that there's not just a bunch of empty buildings occupying the area. So if you don't have your shields upkept for the buildings, storms can remove them and completely clear that area so that other players can then build there, basically. Classes. Now this is interesting. From the interview, it was said that there are 6 classes. We know that there's 5, so it's kind of up in the air right now if that was just a mistranslation. But there are 5 classes, let's go with it. 45 powers being the abilities, right? The skills. 45 techniques, which are the passive abilities. 60 to 80 attributes, more damage from assault, diminishing stamina loss by 10%. Basically, like attributes, think of them as like, buffs and debuffs for your stat lines and things like that. Like, equipping a certain armor would degrade your stamina by 10% less. So a picture like 60 to 80 of those types of build modifiers, let's say. It is possible to reset the class build every 48 hours at the moment in the beta. Maybe there will be a cost, example spice, like it costs spice to respec your class build basically. In terms of the Bene Gesserit spells, this is just a kind of brief overlook of some of the Bene Gesserit spells. We'll go over more later, but some of the skills will include passing the adversary and backstabbing them, so kind of being able to quick teleport maybe to the back of them and get more damage from a backstab. This also suggests that backstabbing has more damage inherently tied to it, so attacking from the back of a player might cause more damage. Also including performing an action on adversary for 4 seconds, and by tracking for 3 seconds, then the BG player becomes invisible to the adversary for 10 seconds. This one's a curious one. I think what it means is maybe the BG player will have to like keep their reticle locked on an enemy for 4 seconds, then they'll be able to kind of enter into this cloaked mode where they are basically invisible to the playing field for a short amount of time. We will have to see how that plays out, but there is evidence of this invisible cloaking ability mentioned later as well, so we'll have to see. It could be possible to find a BG quest to learn the skills that are available for the player class at the start of the game, although it would require a specialist quest to add this skill. This is basically saying that, we know that the classes aren't limited specifically, so that you're able to branch out and kind of learn all the skills from the different class disciplines. They will require you to find a trainer somewhere in the world and then possibly do a quest, as it says, a specialist quest, to sort of learn those other skills from the other tree branches. So this is a good thing for people that like to kind of try different class builds, see what they can learn, and sort of see what the best synergizing build is for their character. Also that you can reset the build every 48 hours, so you're not kind of cemented into your choices, which is nice for some players. The voice skill from the BG receives a boost when there's more spice in the blood. This basically is just saying that your skills kind of improve and have levels to them. We've seen this in the skill tree images, that sort of multi-tiers to your skills. Having more spice in the blood is obviously one of these push and pull mechanics that's going to be in the game. It will allow you to have more abilities and stronger abilities. For instance, you won't be able to acquire a 3rd skill if you don't maintain a certain level of spice in the blood. This is also going to come with some debuffs, obviously, as sort of the give and take in there. Lower stamina max, lower max HP, something like that. That'll kind of counterbalance the power aspect to it. There is a skill to make you immune to the voices of the Bene Gesserit. So this is interesting. We finally see like evidence of being able to counter the Bene Gesserit skills that we know are going to kind of influence characters and enemies, making them do certain things like the voice pull becoming invisible, things like that. So there are going to be counter skills that will kind of make you as a player immune to the advances of the Bene Gesserit skills. I can see this kind of working out as like perhaps you're a Mentat focused player. You do your battlefield calculation, you see that the opponents have like a Bene Gesserit over across the battlefield, and so maybe you cast like a shield around you and your fellow players that kind of make them immune to the skills that the Bene Gesserit might want to cast on you. This would kind of create this really interesting you think that you're going to have an advantage over your opponent, but it turns out that they've actually got like a proper counter to the skills that you've equipped. So we'll see how this plays out in more interesting ways as we learn more about the skill system. But this is a cool sign right here, because the Bene Gesserit skills seemed like they might have been a little overpowered. So now we'll kind of see how that can balance out with these counter skills. It's very interesting. So more into classes. Again, it mentions 6 classes, but I think we know that there's 5. Here's a couple interesting ones per class. The Bene Gesserit is going to have, among other things, a triple dash skill. I believe this is called the Bindu dash. I have a screenshot of that as well I'll put up here. Something that mentions melee to melee, so we're not sure what that is technically. The ability to resurrect allies. Voices for crowd control, obviously we know about the voice pull and things like that. Disability skill, an invisibility skill, and a stun skill. So those are a couple of the voice skills that are mentioned here. As far as Mentats go, we know that they're going to have some assassin-based skills, like the Hunter-Seeker skill, obviously. Something about distance, so not sure what that is. That's probably the battlefield calculation. Shooter skills, which I think is the headshot skill that we've seen mentioned, and it is mentioned later in the parentheses here, the headshot bonus. Robots, which is interesting. So that might be Hunter Seekers, and that might be something else besides Hunter Seekers. So maybe some other interesting reconnaissance robots or things like that you might be able to customize your Hunter Seeker so that it can do different things. We have seen the Hunter Seeker itself have a slot for a skill that was kind of blurred out, and so it might have more things that you can do with the Hunter Seeker as you improve its ability. There's a grenade skill, which is interesting because we saw the Trooper has a grenade skill as well, so it might be a different sort of grenade for the Mentat that's specifically locked into the Mentat tree. There's going to be the ability to unlock micro stun bullets. That's very cool. And the immunity to the voice. So that was what we were talking about just before this. The Mentat is going to kind of be the counter to the Bene Gesserit skills. So you'll be able to equip these skills that allow you to kind of, either for yourself or for your group around you, be able to negate or deflect the skills of the Bene Gesserit enemies that you're going to encounter. So that's really cool. As far as the Trooper goes, we know that there's a grenade. This grenade slows or boosts, it's interesting. We're not sure exactly what that means. That might be like the Spencer grenades that kind of put an anti-gravity field for the enemies that levitate them and disable them from moving, or boosts, which is interesting. So maybe there's a zone where it speeds you up and you can run a little faster through the grenade cloud or something like that. There's going to be a dash in midair, vertical movement such as the grappling hook. Obviously, we've seen that. The Swordmaster is going to have a skill to run faster. There's going to be a targeted dash. That's probably the knee charge, I want to assume. Resistance to bullets. The way I'm seeing it is like the Mentat is going to be the counter to the Bene Gesserit. I'm thinking that the Swordmaster is going to be the counter to the Trooper in true kind of Dune sense, right? Anyone that's practicing sword skills is kind of good at deflecting, so the Troopers are going to be better at inflicting damage. The Swordmasters are going to be better at like resisting damage and something like that. This is what I'm thinking. When cutting, you can also slow down. Not sure what that means. That might be the ability to increase your melee chances of penetrating a shield. That's kind of what I'm getting from that. It's hard to tell, though. The interesting thing is the Planetologist, which we haven't heard a lot about. Planetologist skills are going to be centered around attuning to Arrakis, basically, becoming one with the environment and being able to manipulate the environment a little bit. So things like looting more resources, consuming less fuel. Machines will generate less heat. You can use your scanners better. You'll be the person that kind of gathers the resources for the team because you will have sort of buffs that allow you to get more out of the looting process. If you're somebody that's interested in mining and gathering the water for the team, you're definitely going to want to look into the Planetologist skill tree. Things like losing your water less quickly, being able to get more resources from mining, consuming less fuel. This is sort of the supply chain master. This is kind of the logistics team focus right there. So that'll be an interesting thing to see players try to invest in in and how much time and effort they put into building out the planetologist skill. Moving into the deep desert, we talked earlier about the Haga Rift, which is going to be this giant chasm that goes very deep and gets very dark, so that's going to be a cool location to check out. No phasing is planned for the deep desert, which is to be determined, but everyone should see every player with no instancing. Not sure how this is going to play out yet. Anti-raid in the deep desert, and not sure exactly what that means. That might be referring to the mechanics that I just mentioned, with locations having kind of borders around them that prevent players from stepping into a location that already has too many players in it. So anti-raid in that sense, meaning that you're not going to be able to what's known as zerging certain areas so that you kind of overpower them by sheer numbers. That's kind of what I'm getting from that. Deep desert loot, yes, and it's more important depending on the size. This might mean like the size of the point of interest. If an eco lab is a small eco lab in the deep desert, it might have obviously less loot. If you do find like a very, very large eco lab or a very large shipwreck, obviously there's going to be more opportunities to find interesting loot. So make no mistake, it's not just going to be a giant empty expanse of sand. There will be places to go and check out that will change every week from the Coriolis storm. Level 86 was reached by a player. By coming to Gamescom on the last day, the player was able to go deeper into the game. This is interesting because it says they only played for 1 hour and 40 minutes and they reached level 86 somehow. So I'm not sure if that's accurate as far as what the level scaling is going to feel like in the game. It seems like that's a little bit short to be able to reach level 86, seeing as how they say like it takes 5 to 10 hours just to leave the Haga Basin. So not sure if that's completely accurate, or it might have been scaled up for the Gamescom demo. There will be NPCs on the shield wall. There will be fewer NPCs in the deep desert than there are in the Haga Basin. So don't expect to find a lot of the skill trainers and things like that out in the deep desert. Again, it is going to be the end game. So there's going to be sort of less of the quest-centric stuff happening out in the deep desert. It doesn't mean there's no NPCs out there. It's just not going to be where you would expect a lot of the sort of non-player characters. Battles between ornithopters, the booster or the rocket launcher. These are obviously options for the ornithopter customization. Players organized a dogfighting session in the deep desert with ornithopters and maneuvering. There's no auto-targeting. Player-based targeting is the thing that the game is using. Gliding ornithopters can go really fast and help to dodge. So this is talking about the capabilities of the ornithopter. We know that there are like barrel rolls and flips, for lack of a better word, that you can do with the ornithopter. These maneuvers are probably limited to the glide mode, and we'll see how that kind of works. But you all know the classic sort of ornithopter dives that we've seen in the movies and things like that. So it does look like that's going to be included. Deep desert could be balanced between 300 and 900 players. We talked about this earlier. So this is kind of what the max is looking like for the deep desert right now. We know it's over 300 players. They're shooting for 900 players to be like the total max number for one of the deep deserts in your game world. This ultimately means that there's going to be possibly like 1,000 player lock on the server that you're playing in. So whether that means that there's going to be like North America 1, North America 2, North America 3, Europe 1, Europe 2, so on and so forth, it does seem like the total cap for that, seeing as how everyone's going to be able to share the one big deep desert, it seems like it's going to be locked at around 900 to 1,000 players as far as this goes right now. So they mentioned that stream sniping is going to be a risk in the deep desert, so we'll see how that plays out. I'm not too worried about stream sniping, so that's not a big deal for me. 3 entry points to the deep desert are going to be at the bottom of the map, so you enter from the south part of the deep desert when leaving the shield wall, the Haga Basin. There's going to be the east, the middle, and the west. Moving on to durability and gear. Durability hits to some equipment, so through damage in battle you will lose durability on your equipment. Gear loses durability over time. Each time you repair it, it can only be done to 90%, then 70%, then eventually having to replace the item. There is a recycling machine, which is cool, for old gear that spits out the resources, and then there is a repair bench also. There's a dual durability system, which means that you can repair the item, but every time you do it, it becomes less durable. You kind of have an overall durability to it that degrades over time, and you can repair it to renew that to a certain extent. There are giant radiation zones that you will need gear for. We've seen this with the hazmat suits. There's confirmed to be no full gear looting, so we know that you're not going to be able to take all of the opponent's armor and weapons off of them. It's going to be mostly limited to resources, Solari, water, building materials, spice, things like that. Player-to-player trading is possible if we see each other in the world. Also possible to place a sale on my items in a town. So this is talking about obviously the player market that we've heard about, sort of this player-run economy idea idea where you get to put your items into a vendor shop, and other players will be able to see those items and purchase them. So you'll be able to kind of dictate the pricing. We've seen this in games like New World. It does tend to get a little wonky and a little bit skewed. I would expect there to be kind of some certain items becoming just super devalued to the point where there's no point to even have them on the market, versus things like the unique schematics that players find in the crashed wrecks that will be highly valuable and possibly completely overpriced. And these things might be affected by the Landsrat once we get into the end game, and you know, the controlling house being able to sort of dictate prices on certain things. Gear will lose durability over time. Every time you repair it, it can only be done to 90, then 70, then eventually having to replace the item. We just talked about that, so don't worry about that. Just reiterating, there will be a repair bench and a recycling machine, which is awesome. RNG, gear drop at 100%, and some RNG loot table. Some loot will always spawn after killing an enemy. Economy Director is not fond of grinding for gear, so they want this to be an easy way to get gear and not having to constantly kill the same enemy as trying to find like certain things. There will be kind of a guarantee that some loot will always be dropped by an enemy. Water and fuel are survival elements on the overland map. Better gear and more of these resources will allow you to travel further in the Orny flying minigame. So that just means that the overland map, when you do leave the Haga Basin and choose to go to other places, your ornithopter icon on that map is going to require fuel and water in order to run. So there will be ways apparently to upgrade either yourself or your ornithopter in such a way that it takes less fuel or it doesn't need as much water, and thusly you'll be able to fly farther and not have to worry about stopping in certain places. We don't know how important that is, because as far as it stands now, you only have to take the ornithopter between the Haga Basin, to the deep desert or Harko Village or Arakeen. So if you're able to get to those places within a short trip, I don't know how important having fuel and water constantly as a resource is going to be, only if maybe you had to stop off at other short stops, but we haven't seen that really yet being mentioned. So I'm not sure how important that resource management is going to be yet, or why you would need to upgrade it unless you really couldn't make it to those locations in one go. That one's kind of up in the air for me, not sure yet. On the topic of events, the event of a crashing ship, we know about shipwrecks. Currently presented in trailers in the beta, the loot is outside of the ship. Within the game at launch, the player will need to use the cutter ray to cut off walls to access the loot inside the crashed ship. And so you will be able to get inside these ships. You just need to have your cutter ray handy to cut the walls off and enter the ship for the loot there. As far as events goes, the Sardaukar ship that patrols shines a beam of light down at the player to find them. Obviously, we're going to be trying to fight the Sardaukar as often as possible every night. Defeated mercenaries, meaning Sardaukar will drop loot. Funcom will balance this event to prevent players from farming the mercenaries. So, activity to improve base. 2 dungeons, event in the shipwreck from the sky, and the Eco Lab, which is more like a Skyrim dungeon, and large caverns. So basically, if you want to improve your base building abilities, you're going to have to go to these shipwrecks and these eco labs to find tools and resources that'll help you with base building. Each dungeon is tailor-made in the Haga Basin. There is some reuse later on in the game, like in the Deep Desert, you might see some reskins or reuse of certain layouts, but every one of the places in the Haga Basin is going to be like a handcrafted experience. Potential strong enemy boss at the end of the loot rooms in the eco lab. We talked about that earlier, so that's gonna kind of be like where the best loot at the end of an Ecolab run is going to be. When entering an Ecolab, a spawn point is created just outside of the lab, so in case you die during an Ecolab run, you're not gonna have to respawn back at your base or at a vehicle or something like that. As far as the Fremen go, we know this interesting word Mizrabar now, which is going to be a giant hammer of rock, which is a sacred Fremen place. This is what Mizrabar is, I'm pretty sure, right here. So there's an image of it. Future plans include tundra area near the polar caps. This is the Frozen Fremen DLC. If you've been in the Discord, that's a little inside joke. But Ice DLC is pretty much confirmed. And the Fremen, we know now that it's kind of been a false propaganda that they've been exterminated. We know that they are going to be on Arrakis. They're just hiding, or they're somewhere we can't see immediately. We must find the Fremen. This is what the story of the game is going to be based around. We don't know exactly how the story is going to play out, but we know that it's very centric around finding the Fremen and figuring out what happened to them. As far as guilds go, many guilds can engage in PvP at once. Like I said, there are technical caps that are going to be preventing too many players from being in the same area. There's also going to be a cap on the guild size itself. Guild size should be double the raid size, and guild size will be 50-ish. Now again, we know this is kind of outdated. The cap is now held at 32 per guild. That might increase, but for now that's where it stands. At launch, there will not be any systems for guild alliances. That was a lot of information. Let's go ahead and put a pause in it for right now, and we'll continue this in the second part of the video that I'm going to upload right after this one. Then we'll finish the rest of the information that we have. All right, see you there.